Let's discuss season 3 of YellowJackets. We're going to start off by just going over my interpretation of the show, its status compared to other shows, my interpretation of Shauna, Lottie, and Natalie as characters philosophically, and then we'll go into just my quick thoughts on each character, what I liked about them and what I didn't like about them in the season. And at the end, we're going to discuss a little bit about the show's social media legs, the shipping culture around the show, and some recent political happenings at Paramount that may or may not affect the way that the remainder of the seasons of YellowJackets are written. So I come from a background of really being into shows like Mr. Robot, or Severance, shows that are heavily facilitate things like theory crafting, online discussion about where you think this plot line or this mystery is going to go. Shows that have very, very, very strong online culture surrounding discussion and things of that nature. And when I started YellowJackets, I truly believe that this show has the potential to go down as an all-time classic in terms of elegant narrative storytelling alongside shows like Breaking Bad, Mr. Robot, and Succession and Severance, judging from the first season of YellowJackets. Now, and there was also a timing thing that I noticed here. The release of Severance and YellowJackets around the same time, where both shows were releasing episodes on a weekly basis in quick succession of one another, had the potential to go down as the television version of something like the Barbenheimer phenomenon, that we saw two very different films actually increasing one another's viewership and popularity on social media due to them both being good films, their fan bases being very different, but them both having a playful relationship with one another and some overlap there in the fan communities. Now, YellowJackets and Severance are, the reason I mention this is because they are two fandoms that are heavily invested in theory crafting, and they're both two fandoms that have developed a very strong shipping culture on social media. We'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the discussion here. But as television and film is beginning to take longer and longer, there are fewer episodes per season with longer waits in between seasons. Things like fandom engagement are extremely important for keeping interest in a show going. We see issues popping up with shows like Stranger Things. The show is just taking way too long to get to the end. The fandom engagement has tapered off. You do not see that happening in shows like, for instance, Severance. And a little bit to a certain extent, I believe, Succession. I'm not sure how many years were between each season, but the fandoms in those cases were heavily motivated and engaged, theory crafting, discussion, and so on and so forth. These are the kinds of qualities that really allow a TV show to thrive in this social media-based era that we're in. So I had a lot of very high hopes for YellowJackets. I felt that it was going to hit that social media pillar, that it was going to have very strong legs on social media, which it does. It did hit that. I was also hoping that it would have a masterfully crafted and elegant narrative. I felt that that was true for season 1. I very much liked season 2, and I very much liked season 3. But I do feel as though the writers fumbled and faltered in some areas that might be irreparable for a show that is seeking that glory and honor that shows like Succession, Severance, and Breaking Bad and Mr. Robot kind of have among their fan bases. Overall, I strongly recommend watching YellowJackets. It's still a very good show. It has a very excellent cast, very excellent soundtrack. I wanted to mention the comparisons between YellowJackets and another show that I really liked, which was The Haunting of Blythe Manor, which is on Netflix, I believe. When we talk about the adult timeline in this discussion video, I'm going to be expressing a lot of disappointment. Because of The Haunting of Blythe Manor, I know that what they were going for and what they had laid the foundation for in season 1 is possible to execute very, very well. So if you don't know about The Haunting of Blythe Manor, it's I don't know what I would call it, I'll just describe the plot. A family moves into a manor. Something traumatic happens to the mother in that house. She passes away, and the kids flee the house in the event of all that, and so on and so forth. There's some creepy things that happen in the house, like some supposed supernatural events that are interpreted as supernatural by the very young children in the house. Some other members of the family don't believe in all that stuff. But the long story short is, this family goes through a traumatic event together, and then they grow up, and they all split apart. They're adults. They live in different areas. They have different lives. And the show shows each character and how that trauma in their childhood has affected them. And it does that by using supernatural and horror elements as the allegory for trauma. One of the characters, who is a young boy at the time of the traumatic events, when he's older, he becomes a drug addict. And that drug addiction and trauma is represented as this sort of long, ghostly man that keeps following him around, and only he can see. One of the other kids, who was a young girl at the time of the events, becomes suicidal. And this is represented in the TV show as her having sleep paralysis and then seeing a woman with a bent neck floating above her. We later discover that this woman that she saw was herself from the future after she had hung herself and her neck became bent. The usage of that was just an allegory for suicidal ideation and how it wouldn't leave her alone. Again, other children in the family have different, they each have their different quote unquote supernatural thing occurring to them as a result of what happened as they were kids. And I can't remember how exactly it ends, but the family comes back together at the end to take on this manor and how it is haunting them. That is a very, very, very good show. It uses supernatural, there's a traumatic event, and then it uses supernatural elements to represent various mental illnesses or trauma responses and so on and so forth. And we really get to see how trauma can manifest differently in different adults. YellowJackets seem to have wanted to portray something very similar, judging from season 1. We have the teen plotline in the wilderness with all the things that happen there. And then the adult plotline, we split up. And we go through each of the survivors, seeing where they are in their life now and how the trauma of what happened has affected them, with that supernatural horror slant to it as a means of representing all of that trauma. We see it in Ty's storyline, with the other Ty sort of being maybe a way of portraying disassociation or multiple personality disorders, dissociative identity disorder, and things of that nature. We see Shauna, who's sort of like a sociopath, serial killer type of personality, not being able to connect properly with her husband, with her daughter. We see people like Misty, who was a bit stable in the sense of she maintains her same behaviors as before the crash as after. And we see Travis committing suicide, Lottie back on medication, making a cult or whatever, Natalie on drugs. So it seemed like they wanted to do something very similar to Blythe Manor in YellowJackets. However, as we are in season 3, I feel as though the writers have chosen to redirect the adult timeline away from the original foundation of having the adult timeline just explore trauma, to having the adult timeline be a sort of like final destination type of deal where characters are dropping one by one, and then there's going to be some sort of a battle between two key characters at the end. Now, that's not a bad narrative for the adult timeline. It's still interesting, but having the foundation for the other kind of storytelling laid in the first season makes it feel like just lost potential. Like a lot of things were just dropped concerning Ty, concerning Misty, and that much of the adult timeline has converged on Shauna, and it was probably always going to do that. That's not inherently the problem. It's just that the way that the story has converged on Shauna in both the teen and adult plot lines seems as though it's missing that elegance in terms of writing that the first season did have. So my complaints are mostly restrained to feelings of missed potential and feeling as though there is simply not enough time in the season for both the teen and adult plot lines to get the kind of writing that they deserve. The pacing for the adult timeline feels all over the place for me. There are points in the adult timeline where I'm genuinely like skipping, like actually fast forwarding. That is a sign that something feels very, very slow to me. The teen plotline does not have the same issue, in my opinion. And I think part of that in the adult timeline is due to my understanding that much of Ty's plotline has been put on the back burner, as well as much of Misty's, in exchange for them being more in alignment with Shauna's storyline. So feels like there's just like a lot of empty space when we're not with Shauna in the adult plotline here. So in short, I feel like YellowJackets needs more episodes in a season if they want to continue with this teen and adult plotline happening at the same time. And they also need shorter time in between seasons. This whole situation going on with television where there's like 3-4 years in between seasons is just diabolical. It's atrocious. We need to get back to that 1 season a year type of deal. And if we are feeling very adventurous, the on-season and off-season structure where a season is released maybe in the spring and then the next season is released in the fall of that same very year. I'm willing totally to take a cut on scope and quality of the production of YellowJackets if that means seasons can come out quicker. So the first character we're going to talk about is Shauna. I love Shauna as a character. She is the most fun character for me. I love when movies or TV shows allow female characters to just be completely unhinged and crazy and get away with it, at least for a time. we're going to talk a little bit about how I interpret Shauna, Lottie, and Natalie as allegories for different types of leadership structures or governmental structures in societies. However, in short, I believe Shauna represents the war chief, that sort of rudimentary tribal leadership that is slightly more evolved than the type of governmental structure Lottie was offering. In short, in history, there have been a couple of philosophers, well, not a couple, a lot of philosophers who believe that governmental structures come in three sort of main forms, if you break them down and group them into three forms, and that each of these three forms inherently becomes unstable after a certain time and is replaced by one of the other three. So we have the traditional or religious authority type of governmental structure, which I think is represented by Lottie. We'll talk about that more later, but for this section, we're just going to talk about Shauna. You also have Natalie, who I think represents more of the sort of rational or legal authority. And then we have Shauna, who represents the sort of charismatic, authoritarian, or violent leader. You know what? Screw it. I'll just do the characters in order. I'll do Lottie, then I will do Natalie, and then I will do Shauna. And it's going to make sense when I get through all of it. So just hunker down and listen. I think it's really cool to think about the story this way. So here we go. Like I said, there is a general conception amongst some philosophers that there are three main types of governmental structures: the traditional religious authority, the rational authority, and the charismatic authority. Lottie would represent the religious authority. So this would be a form of government or leadership in a society that is based purely on customs, tradition, myth, and spiritual beliefs, and so on and so forth, superstition, that sort of thing. Throughout the show, Lottie continuously, because she's schizophrenic, superimposes spiritual interpretations on everything that is happening in the wilderness. And when they first land in the wilderness, they don't have any clearly defined societal structure. This kind of leadership, this religious authority type of leadership, is appealing because Lottie seems to have all of the answers. She seems to be continually and persistently confident in outcomes and what will happen and what people need to do. And the unfortunate part about this form of government is that it is very, very unstable. Once the leader, in the case Lottie, is unable to justify the lack of results, so their hunger in the wilderness, with their confidence in their religion or their superstition, the system crumbles. Essentially, as soon as people begin to question the religion itself, this form of government, the religious authority government, begins to become unstable. So philosophers call this form of government inherently doomed. It requires an ever escalating and more complex series of rituals in order to satisfy people. It demands belief without any physical proof. And if things do not happen as they are predicted by Lottie, skepticism rises sharply. So Lottie, being this sort of image of the priestly rule of a society, collapses very quickly in the wilderness. Once Lottie's not able to bring food, I think she even just tries to walk into the wilderness and die. So she's proven to be very, very powerless very quickly. So the society of the YellowJackets needs to evolve. And then we will talk about the next form of government structure that philosophers say usually come after the religious authority, which is the legal or rational authority, which is Natalie. But let's dive deep into Lottie first. So the situation that the teen YellowJackets are in is truly horrifying. We as human beings find something innately shameful about our nature, about the fact that we are animals, about the fact that our habitat is the wilderness. And we seek to rise above that with refinement through civilization and so on and so forth. But for the YellowJackets, they are suddenly taken out of civilization and put into the wilderness, where there are no norms, no rules, no structure or standards, and no knowledge of whether or not you will be able to survive into the next week. They are forced, all of them are forced to come to terms with the fact that yes, human beings are animals. We can get hungry and starve. We can get angry and kill one another. We can fall sick and die suddenly. We can freeze. Humans can act as pack animals, and there's nothing and no one stopping us from doing that except for our laws and agreed upon social standards. And who wants to live in a society like that, right? A society with unfiltered human nature and human behavior and human vulnerability. We're ashamed of that. We want to be better than that, and we desperately seek out meaning and structure as a result of it. This is where the religious authority comes in, someone like Lottie taking advantage of this hopelessness and this shame and converting it into a practice, a religion, rituals, and so on and so forth. We see it already kind of at, when Jackie died, and they were hungry and they were about to cannibalize her. They had all come to the mob mentality conclusion that the wilderness wants them to do this thing. The wilderness wants us to stay in season 3. That is what Lottie says. The wilderness wants them to eat Jackie. That is what Shauna says. So you see how it's very convenient and very easy to use this religious authority, governmental structure, when there is no structure and when things are very, very difficult. And although this system is doomed to fail, and it did in the YellowJackets, Lottie definitely pulled back from that leadership position. She couldn't perform. She handed it over to Natalie. This season, however, seems to become very gentle and individualized in terms of Lottie's influence over the other girls. I wrote here in my sort of scrambled bullet point notes that I would have loved to have seen Lottie do something similar to that one Twilight Zone episode where the entire neighborhood was paranoid that there were aliens. It started off as no one believing that there were aliens. Then people become superstitious. And then people, see things in the shadows. They begin to point fingers, accusations. And that neighborhood turns into a chaotic frenzy of superstition. I would have liked to have seen Lottie do something like that. I feel as though she's not being used enough to sow conflict between different groups of characters, if you know what I mean. Her story, Lottie's influence, has become very, very individualized to specific characters that she focuses on and she gets fixated on, which is, again, it's not a bad thing. That's not a bad storyline to tell. But I think if we continue with my interpretation of Lottie, Natalie, and Shauna representing different types of governments that humans tend to gravitate towards. I would really like to see that taken to its metaphorical extreme for each governmental structure at least once. Lottie, in my opinion, should be instilling paranoia continually. She should be shown to weaponize this paranoia for her own security and her own life insurance. There should be more drug use encouraged by Lottie, more sophisticated rituals being developed by her, and there should be devotees and zealots among the YellowJackets who are a part of Lottie's faction. I think that would make things a lot more threatening, give Lottie some more power, and make it more serious when Shauna's structure, Shauna's way of leading, and Lottie's way of leading join together and merge into one. Her allying with Shauna as a sort of false prophet that sort of accelerates whatever Shauna is doing and gives some credence to whatever Shauna is saying would also be very nice to see. So essentially what I'm saying is that each of these characters sort of represent this rudimentary tribal society. And I would like, before Rescue, if the YellowJackets writers had made it so that each of these structures had been explored and developed to a certain extent before they obviously become unstable and transition into the next one. The show is doing all of this. I'm not saying that it's not doing this at all, but it does seem as though the show is drifting away from much of its allegorical beginnings and into a more stereotypical type of hero versus villain story. And I think doing that, giving Lottie that more influence, that more complex, the more complexity to her character, would make the things that Shauna did in this season concerning having henchmen, having tents being searched, all of that paranoia, all of that devout loyalty make more sense. So in terms of my feelings on the story, I just think Lottie's not manipulative enough, basically, in short. She's a very fun character still, just not utilized to the maximum of her potential concerning the way that she degrades morality among the group, instilling superstition, paranoia, and so on and so forth. It's very individual this season. In terms of the acting, Courtney Eaton, it's all in her eyes. I don't know what she does with her eyes exactly, but it feels like she's looking through characters when she talks to them and not at them. It really plays very well with Lottie as a character. It makes her feel like a brick wall, someone who's just not there, completely delusional. You can't reason with her. Very, very good portrayal of the character by Courtney. The adult Lottie by Simone Kessel, I also very much liked her character. I was disappointed that she died early on in the season. I thought that she was going to be an even, similarly to the teen plotline, right? I'd like to see her be more of a destabilizing figure. Someone who instills paranoia in Shauna, instills paranoia in the other adult YellowJackets, and makes them begin to fall into these old habits that we're seeing in season 3. I just like to see everything woven together so that each of the adult YellowJackets feel like they're having a true and serious impact on making things spiral, rather than things feeling like it's just Shauna, which is not, again, it's not a problem for it to be just Shauna that is causing all of these things. But I feel that the story would be more elegant if it did things a different way. So that's it for Lottie here. We're going to move on to Natalie to keep in alignment with my interpretation of these three governmental structures so that I'm not doing one here and then one like 30 minutes later or something. Right, so the next character we have here is Natalie, who I think represents the rational legal authority structure that some philosophers say is one of the main three that human beings transition into after one of the other two collapses. So after Lottie's spiritual and superstitious form of rule fails, when it's not able to justify its lack of delivery, Natalie is there to reimpose a certain order through concepts like reason and rule of law. She maintains one of the more secular characters within the group. She never really believed anything that Lottie was saying, and she was never truly corrupted to the same degree as the other characters in the wilderness, even though she was able to adapt, unlike Jackie, who wasn't able to adapt at all. So this form of leadership, the rational authority, is defined by philosophers as leadership based not on some divine right or divine rules, but negotiated and debated about rules, standards, and procedures. This is the form of government you see in democratic societies of today. Liberal democracies practice a form of rational legal authority. This type of leadership is when the ruler tries to impose fairness, encourage rational distribution of things like resources, where they stick to rules and norms that are not coming from a doctrine or an iron-fisted leader, but rules that are negotiated upon and agreed upon by people. So there's a philosopher named Hobbes who warned that this structure of government, the rational authority structure of government, was inevitably doomed, just as the religious structure of government was. And even though I really like this structure of government, I do kind of have to agree with him on some points. So here's what he said. He argued that when human beings come out of one of the other governmental structures and into the rational way of ruling a society, if there's prosperity during that time, everyone's happy, blah, blah, blah. But when a rational authority structure faces life-threatening threats like starvation or a famine, an extreme war on your own soil, chaos, political chaos, human beings abandon reason and logic. And they even might abandon society altogether. His assertion and his claim was that people will not obey previously agreed upon rules and laws when they are afraid for their life. And because the rational authority governmental structure depends on a collective agreement on rules and norms and laws, when there is a threat to that society that makes the people in it feel like their life is in danger, instantly that rational authority governmental structure becomes very unstable. The argument here is that human beings, at their core, when stripped of society, rules, logic, when stripped of everything except ration and primal instinct will always outlast ration, and reason. So how does this relate to Natalie, and why am I rambling about all of this? I think Natalie represents that kind of structure in the triad as a leader. The group transitions into it after Lottie's way of doing things fails, and they do enter into a period of prosperity in the summer. Things are going well. There's plenty of food. There's water. People are relatively clean considering their circumstances. And they figured out a system. The society even has a court, and things are going pretty well. However, when the threat of Ben appears in the wilderness again, they realize he's still alive. Natalie's way of ruling begins to feel weak compared to someone like Shauna, who we're going to talk about next, who represents the charismatic authoritarian leader. The people in the group are prone to reverting to tribalistic, emotional conclusions rather than Natalie's more rational way of doing things when faced with someone like Ben, who they feel is a threat to their life. Similarly, when the hikers appear, Lottie and Shauna step up and are almost immediately allowed to take the lead in that situation. With Natalie continually looking weak, indecisive, and unable to soothe the fears of the people in the YellowJackets. It's very relevant for some of the stuff we're seeing here today in America, with this rational legal authority being tested by the charismatic authoritarian authority that is attempting to emerge by portraying the rational way of doing things as weak, slow, inferior, unable to respond to threats like alleged illegal invasion, looming wars, and so on and so forth. So that is what happened to Natalie. She steps in, makes things better in the summer, but when a threat appears during that era of prosperity, the group begins to unravel and Natalie begins to lose her influence. I think it was done very well. I liked it. Natalie, in terms of acting, I think Sophie Thatcher has very, very good line delivery. I had two scenes here from the last episode where she is discussing with Hannah, Hannah's motivations. You can really feel the temperature, like the literal temperature, that Natalie is cold, that it's cold outside, that she's freezing. You can hear and feel the anger, the desperation, the frustration in her voice. I'm not one who usually notices those sorts of things, but it was so good that I felt like I had to mention it in this discussion. Let's take a little listen to that so you can see what I'm talking about. So it was those two. I just think those line deliveries were very good. I don't know why. I don't know why exactly I like them so much. But hats off to Sophie Thatcher for making me notice that. In terms of the adult timeline, it feels very weird without Natalie in the adult timeline. When Jackie died, she literally continues to haunt the narrative. Jackie's death was very heavy. And it still weighs on everything that happens in the teen plotline in a manner that's very satisfying. When Natalie died in the adult plotline, it felt like there was a way they could have done it as to where it would be impactful in that satisfying and elegant manner, the way that Jackie's death was. However, the way that they did it, it just kind of feels like a key player in the narrative suddenly disappeared from the narrative, and then the writers switched gears to focus on Shauna's unraveling again. So the adult timeline feels very sorry without Natalie. I still haven't gotten over it. I thought I was going to be over it by this time, but yeah, it definitely does feel like Natalie's death was a tipping point for the writing, or not a tipping point, but a crossroads for the writing that played out in a way that could have been executed much better. So we are going to discuss the last person in the triad, which is Shauna. So Shauna is the dictator of the final season, or not the final season, the latest season. She's probably going to be the leader in the Antler Queen until the very end. Right up front, like I said in the beginning, I love Shauna. She's a very fun character, excitingly evil, not evil in a boring way, very fun to watch. I love that she just messes up everything for everyone. Line delivery, also very good. When Sophie Nélisse yelled at Melissa during their argument, again, I really felt the emotions. I actually felt like she was angry with Melissa, like it wasn't even acting. Melanie Lynskey knocks it out of the park as always with her excellent American accent and way of portraying Shauna and that psychopath, sort of sociopath type of personality. Now, in terms of the sort of philosophical aspect, and I promise this is the last one, there's only 3 of them, Lottie, Natalie, and Shauna. Shauna kind of represents that warrior mentality, that war chief, violent, authoritarian, charismatic authority that people tend to gravitate toward when they are afraid. So Natalie was not able to hold on to power in the face of Shauna's more strict, fearsome, and sovereign way of doing things. Like I said, this type of leadership is the third in that triad. It's called the charismatic authority. It's defined as a form of governmental rule based not on tradition or superstition, like Lottie, and not on negotiated rules and expectations, like Natalie, but rather on a hyper-individual, personal force of nature who is often violent and has a very strong aura about them concerning their leadership and their rule. Some philosophers believe, and I kind of believe this very solemnly and sadly, kind of like looking at a train wreck, that societies will inevitably transition into the authoritarian leader for a time. When they're not in that state, they're always going to be trending towards back to that state. And when they're in that state, they're going to be in that state for some time before they suddenly break out into one of the other 2 structures, only to slowly trend back into the charismatic authority structure. So philosophers tend, like the popular one that I was mentioning, like Hobbes, tend to believe that this way of organizing people is quote unquote natural. Not natural in a moral or ethical connotation way, but natural in a primal sort of way of thinking about things. Human beings naturally seek to impose their will and impose peace by way of force, by way of fear, and by way of fear of death. People are willing to surrender their rights, their freedoms to a leader because having an authoritarian leader who is violent is still better in the mind of a primal human than a society where everyone can can do as they please, and anything can be negotiated upon. The idea is that human beings are inherently afraid of being left to their own devices to do as they please with one another. And so there are times such as during war, famine, when things are getting tough, when things are getting unstable, and there is a looming sort of vibe or fear that the society is going to go into chaos and that people in close proximity with one another are going to begin to fight each other, that people are very willing to have an authoritarian leader enact violence so that the individuals don't have to do it and they just fall in line due to fear. Shauna, I know some people were upset with the fact that Shauna just kind of walked up to Natalie and took the gun and became the leader from that point on. I understand it was the way that it was done was a bit odd, but I agree with the overall premise. These types of charismatic leaders usually do seize power suddenly after slowly emerging with their influence through previous eras or previous events. It makes sense that the trust in Natalie as a leader would be degraded so much to the point where, and in such a situation such as hikers randomly appearing amongst the YellowJackets and claiming to be able to take them home to rescue, that someone like Shauna, in the midst of all of this sudden change and chaos, would just seize power and impose her own vision of the society and her own vision of order. That all tracks and makes sense. However, I think it just wasn't done in a manner that was, again, satisfying and what I feel the show deserves in terms of writing. Shauna's ascent into being the Antler Queen definitely felt very, very fast, like it happened very suddenly, like there was missing episodes where her influence would have increased. I know they had the episode with the trial and all of that stuff. We see it, but I feel as though something went on in those like last 2 episodes where things just moved a little bit too fast concerning Shauna's degree of control over the YellowJackets. They're afraid of her. I understand that. I understand that when people are afraid of the leader, they'll just do what they say. However, they were all scheming behind her back, and it seemed like no one agreed with Shauna at all. I would have loved to have seen there be a period of time where people did devote themselves to Shauna's form of authoritarian leadership, only for that to become increasingly unstable, and then the hikers come in, and then they begin to plot against Shauna. Right now, it kind of just seems like it went from Natalie to instantly Shauna, and then instantly betray Shauna, and then that's it. Things just happen boom, 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 very, very fast. Again, I like Shauna a lot. She represents that warrior, war chief kind of thing. Hobbes said that something along the lines that, civilization and society, when stripped of all of its myths, all of its reason, all of its laws, society simply belongs to the person who can most effectively wield the threat and fear of death. And that is what Shauna is to me. She is a person who knows how to wield the threat of cruelty, of death, of torture in the wilderness. And I definitely love to see the writers continue with that theme, really lean into it, and allow Shauna to become this very unhinged character that she is representing. All right, we are back in the official order. So I'm going to go through Misty, Van, Melissa, Mari, Thaisa, and Akila pretty quickly. Generally, overall, for all of them, I love the characters. I like them. I've actually grown emotionally attached to each of them. When there's so many characters in the cast, that is a feat to pull off, but YellowJackets did manage to do that. I feel as though for Misty, with the absence of Natalie in the adult timeline, the audience is kind of being drawn to focus on Misty as being the replacement for Natalie in the narrative as the leader of this sort of rational authority type of structure. Even though Misty is not very rational, she won't be able to emulate exactly what Natalie was, but she is that sort of replacement as the hero. I'm rooting for her. I'm rooting for her to come out on top, even above Thaisa, and above Shauna in the end. Simply because I just associate her with Natalie from that point. I've always liked Misty as a character. She's a very destabilizing character as well, unpredictable, but somehow still very consistent in her state of mind. So at this point in the story, we're all kind of used to who Misty is and how she works, how she thinks. She's become very oddly comforting as a character in the adult timeline. Hats off to the actresses for both the teen and adult Misty. Van. From what I heard, Van wasn't even meant to be alive at all past like season 1. She was supposed to die in the wilderness with the wolves, I believe, but they liked her so much, the production crew, that decided to keep her around because of Liv Hewson's performance and what she offered to the dynamic and the roster of the YellowJackets there in the wilderness. So we ended up being blessed with the adult Van as well, Lauren Ambrose. Oh, and I forgot to mention the actresses for Misty. I believe Samantha Henratty and Christina Ricci. 2 very good actresses that I will be following from this point forward. So back to Van. She wasn't meant to be in the story this long. And I knew that. I started watching YellowJackets around season 2, and I had already had been told this by people on social media. I really like Van as a character. She is a comedic relief. She's like a jester kind of character. However, I liked her much more when there was this storyline that I feel was being pretty heavily implied in season 1, which was that Van would be a sort of zealot for Lottie's form of rule and leadership. That she would be a devotee who was sort of brought into that way of thinking by her cheating death from the plane crash and burning, as well as the wolves. I was really hoping that she was gonna, like what Aquila was kind of doing, and Travis, the stuff that Lottie's storyline was doing with Aquila and Travis, fixating on them and making them feel like prophets, making them feel special, having them be sort of like a vector by which Lottie can influence the group by interpreting their hallucinations in the caves and so on and so forth. I was thinking, when I was watching season 1, I was thinking that was where Van's storyline was actually going to go, that she was going to be a devotee for Lottie alongside possibly Misty. However, it seems like in both the teen and the adult plot lines, Van just doesn't believe in that anymore. She's very relatively clear-headed compared to the other characters, somewhat similar to someone like Natalie or Misty, where she's thinking for herself. She's not really pulled into that hive mind, that mob mentality of the other members to the same extent that some of the other YellowJackets are being pulled in. I'm still debating, like I like Van, both in the teen and adult plot lines, the way that she was. I'm still kind of debating if I would have liked that other plot line to have been continued. I think I would. I think it's compelling. I think if you're going to have this 3-headed leadership structure with them each vying for power and making the others unstable, I think each structure should have one loyalist at least. So Lottie should have a zealot, Shauna should have a zealot, Melissa probably, maybe, and Natalie should have a zealot, most likely Travis or Misty. I would have liked to have seen that kind of dynamic with them fighting to undermine and seize power from the other two groups, with eventually Lottie and Shauna teaming up into one to overpower Natalie's structure and ostracize the followers of Natalie completely, sort of like a faction or competing tribes, so to speak. In terms of Van's death, I think it was one of the more impactful ones for me. I think it might have been the most impactful adult death so far. For me, it's going to be sad to see her gone. Again, Van was always funny. Like anytime, I was always looking at Van's facial expressions in scenes and stuff she was doing in the background. A lot of the body and face acting from both actresses was always very good and fun to see. It's sad with them gone. There's going to be another void in the adult timeline. However, I'm pretty satisfied with the way Van went out. I wasn't one of those people who was upset that Melissa killed her, nor was I upset that Melissa came back into the storyline in the way that she did. I liked it personally. So that's a good segue into Melissa. So to be honest, I kind of forgot that Melissa existed before this season came out. Like, I kind of forgot she was there to begin with. That kind of happens with some of the YellowJackets every now and again. Some girls pop out of nowhere only to disappear and come back later. I think that's what happened with Melissa. Some people tell me she was very present in season 2. I don't remember. That was a while ago. However, I like her. Again, another fun character. I liked what they were doing with her and Shauna, with Melissa becoming a loyalist who wasn't really cared for or cared about by Shauna, really. She's just being used blatantly by Shauna to feed Shauna's narcissistic ego. Some people on social media hate Melissa because of how she killed Van. I think you need to learn to separate the emotions that are drawn out of you by a story from whether or not the story actually did something wrong. So if a story draws out negative emotions in you, emotions of sadness, loss, anger, betrayal, like in the case of Melissa, or in the case of Mari's death, feelings of disgust and violation, you should really stop and consider whether or not the show actually did something bad to you, or if the show is just good at drawing those emotions out of you as intended. So hats off to Melissa, no pun intended. Actually, yes, pun intended. Check out the Melissa diss track that little kid uploaded on TikTok. It's really funny. And yeah, Melissa fills up that empty space in the adult timeline that's been left behind by the dropping of much of Ty's storylines, of the death of Natalie, of this very slow Walter storyline going on with Misty. It fills up the space having Melissa there. She's a very exciting character to happen. She's a bit of a wild card at the moment. It seems like she has some wildness still left in her, just like Shauna. So I'm thinking they're going to put Hilary Swank to work in those later seasons. And I'm really happy to see all these actresses of this caliber being casted in this show. When I was a teenage girl, I would have killed to have seen a show with so many leading actresses of this quality and of this type of storyline. So very, very cool. We like Melissa over on this channel. The next one would be Mari. Mari is, of course, the pit girl. Most people theorize that she was the pit girl from the very beginning. This season, a lot of people, including me, thought that it was going to be Hannah. We're hoping it was going to be Hannah because we had grown to like Mari as a member of the YellowJackets. We like the dynamic she brings to that roster in the wilderness. We like that she's a bit of a brat towards Shauna. But yeah, she died. She was a target by Shauna ever since Jackie died, and Mari disrespected Jackie by suggesting that they take her clothes after she died and use them for herself. She was another comedic relief character, kind of like a goofball alongside Van, just a goofball of a different type. out there in the wilderness. I will dearly miss Mari. However, the 10th episode, this hunt scene, so good. Possibly my favorite scene of the season. I think season 1, my favorite scene was Laura Lee's death. If that was in season 1, the soundtrack, the scene, everything was great. Season 2, I believe that's the season where they cannibalized for the first time. I think might have been season 1. But if it wasn't season 2, that was my favorite part of season 2 as well. Love the song that they chose there. Soundtrack, the composition, everything, the way that it was filmed. Very, very nice and satisfying to watch narratively. And then again, in season 3, we had another key standout sequence that will be the poster board of the season, which is that final hunt where the pit girl is finally revealed. I thought from the beginning with Thaisa, once again, as she has continually been doing since the very pilot episode, being shown to be a bit schemy and a bit of a snake, doing things to increase her odds of survival behind the scenes, making that decision to pick who dies, just as she picked that girl to be tackled in the soccer game in the first episode of the show. Thaisa is a very interesting character. We'll talk more about her next. But for now, with Mari, I very, again, I'll just keep repeating it, like the actress, like what she brought to the table. I'm sad we're not going to see her in the adult timeline to talk smack to Shauna, but she went out in a very, very cool scene. I know there was some controversy briefly on Twitter concerning how she died and what Shauna did and said to her and so on and so forth. I actually made a video on it discussing where I think that mentality was coming from, the flaws in the logic and reasoning behind that way of interpreting the show, interpreting Yellowjackets, and this ongoing trend of just endless complaining concerning the show on Twitter. So if you want to see that, there's a video for that on my channel. Check it out. It's very recent. I think it's titled like, "Is Yellowjackets Racist?" No. And that's the title. So yeah, for the hunt scene with Mari, I very much liked how Shauna picked up on the fact that there was something going on with the draw. So she switched places. We weren't quite sure whether or not she did that because she knew they wanted it to be Hannah, or if she thought that they were conspiring against her to make the person who drew the queen Shauna. But either way, Shauna had the presence of mind to just move up in the draw, and it ended up being Mari. The way that Shauna and Mari stood face to face, with Shauna being very vindictive towards her, immediately counting down, making her take off her cape, pushing her to the ground. The way that Mari sort of, she never kneeled, she talked back to Shauna in the end. She talked back to Lottie in the end. So pour one out for Mari. She went out in the best way she could have possibly went out, even though she had the worst and most terrible death of them all, pretty much. Next up is Thaisa. Thaisa is a very, very interesting character. Let's start with the teen plotline. The scene I put for her here is when she stepped up to Shauna and actually got Shauna to back down. Shauna looked a little bit afraid of Thaisa, actually. Thaisa is being set up to be a character who has the ability to resist the authoritarian, even though Thaisa is a little bit of in alignment with Shauna in terms of behavior in the wild. I believe the ending of the show might be a battle between Ty and Shauna specifically, most likely. I wouldn't be opposed to that. I think it'd be very cool. Thaisa Thaisa's interesting because she doesn't want to be the leader, but she wants to have a large amount of influence. If we were to envision Shauna as being a village war chief sort of type of leader, Thaisa would be sort of like a respected general or something of that nature. If we were to consider it like a more developed kingship monarchy with Natalie, Thaisa would play the role as a member of the royal court, a noble. For Lottie, Thaisa could be perceived as, a high-ranking member in the religious structure, right? So Thaisa is able to move and morph between different leadership structures because she's able to scheme. She knows how to fit in and make things sort of bend in her advantage so that she is never a specific target of all of the paranoia and all of the chaos going on, but rather the one wielding power in those situations, or at least being in the good graces of those wielding some power. So that's a very interesting component of Thaisa's character. I'm very interested to see how she develops currently. However, there is a big disappointment with this entire character in the adult plotline. That no-eyed man thing, literally, it's just a terrible plotline at this point. It started off as something that was interesting to think about and to ponder and theorize about, but it seems as though the adult plotline has decided to shed a lot of that, those traumatic themes, right? The exploration of PTSD and trauma and what it did to them, and representing that through these mysterious, supernatural horror elements that we talked about in the beginning with The Haunting of Blythe Manor. I think now that has sort of been put to the back burner, that whole thing, Thaisa's character became less interesting for me personally. I think Thaisa, for the adult plotline, was at her best when we saw the conflict between her whatever disorder she has, where she has two personalities, with her very public status as a politician and her crumbling marriage and her relationship with Van. There was just so much going on with Thai. It seemed like her life was going to implode. And it did implode, but it imploded in a way that was just so unsatisfying. Like, she just got up and left and went on road trips with Van for the entire season. That thing where in the beginning of the season where Van and Thaisa were like, they put a card on the ground and someone picked it up. It just wasn't, it didn't have the effect that I think they were going for. It was just a plot line that happened in the season that I just very quickly erased from my memory when we went back to the other parts of the story. That being said, Jasmine and Tawny, again, very good actresses for this role. The scene I put here for the adult actress was the scene in the last episode with Tawny's sort of monologuing for a bit there while talking to Misty. I loved this scene, and it kind of irritated me because it made me feel like these actors who have caliber behind them are not being utilized to their potential. The way that the scene is shot, I'm a big fan of when the camera doesn't move. I like those still shots where the person's face is very off to the edge of the shot. You know, Severance does it a lot. Mr. Robot did it all the time as a signature. I really, really like that. The way the scene was composed, the way it was acted was very good. Tawny was acting her A off in that scene. And I would just love to see the writers just really just let these actresses act. And you do that by writing good scenes for them to act in. as well. So still like Thais as a character, just a bit disappointed that much of the reason why I was interested in her character has seemingly gone to the back burner in favor of supporting Shauna's storyline and making sure that Shauna's storyline develops properly and elegantly. So the last one we have here is not you, Natalie, but Aquila. Aquila is another character that was in the background. I feel like her character, out of all the characters who came to the forefront, hers came to the forefront in the most smooth and sensible manner. Like I said, I would have preferred if Lottie did not focus on specific individuals and then just have those individuals not believe. Again, at the end, I would have loved to have seen Lottie have some like genuine, deep, and serious, scary devotees. And I think Aquila could have been that. They should have. I think they should have went to the extreme with her in that situation. But overall, I liked her character. I liked her plot line. Her love for animals was always nice to see in the summer after that terrible, terrible and harrowing winter we had last season. It was very nice to see this warm summer with animals moving about, and that was all thanks to Aquila. However, I did have a question. Did she die in that cave in episode 10? She went in there and Lottie was in there. She confronted Lottie, grabbed a rock, and then later on, Lottie comes out and we don't see Aquila. I'm pretty sure we don't see her come out of that cave. And I can't remember if she was present at the very end of the episode, like in the background. So like what, I don't know if it's just me, but like I think she just like disappeared for the rest of the episode after that. And I don't know if we're meant to think something of that or if that just like happened. Just her just not being in the shot for the remaining scenes. My final thoughts about her is that, again, her discipleship with Lottie was more serious than Travis's. Travis didn't believe at all. However, it wasn't tense enough. It just goes in with what I said earlier about Lottie not being a scary enough character because there's no one truly devoted to Lottie's way of leadership in a way that's frightening. And I think the discipleship between Aquila and Lottie could have been more fiery, zealous, I guess is the word, which would make the confrontation between Aquila and Lottie more scary if Lottie decided that Aquila was a threat and she begun to call her a, like a Judas kind of figure and targeted her and begun to spread paranoia and so on and so forth about her over her paranoia of her deserting. I might have even liked to have seen a genuine fight between some of the girls in YellowJackets. So a genuine fist fight between Natalie and Shauna, a physical fight between Aquila and Lottie, and perhaps another fight between Natalie and Shauna Shauna and Lottie against Natalie. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the individual characters. I did want to mention Callie's storyline briefly and Jeff. I'm not sure how to feel about it. My impression after season 2 was that Callie was going to be a sort of Norman Bates kind of character. Just something wrong with her in general. She doesn't react to death and killing the way that other people might react to it. She's like her mother. She gets an adrenaline rush from all of that sort of barbaric behavior. However, her pushing Lottie down the stairs and that being revealed in the last episode, I don't know, it just didn't really have any impact on me personally. It was just like, okay, Callie killed Lottie. I think This scene here that I put up on the screen between her and Jeff, I liked this scene. I like the fact that Jeff is sort of like this loyal husband, but he's also coming to the terms with the fact that he's an enabler, and potentially Callie has been damaged by Shauna's behavior and by the example that Shauna has put forward. I like where they're going with the storyline. I'm open to whatever they're doing here with Callie's storyline. I just don't think the Lottie death was worth the squeeze. I don't think it was worth the disappointment I felt when that happened. But I'm all for Callie becoming like Shauna, a killer like Shauna, to a lesser extent. I'm also good with her becoming a force against Shauna, teaming up with some of the other YellowJackets who might want to take Shauna out. And having her being an ever-present threat of telling the police and so on and so forth, unraveling all of Shauna's work that she did to make herself look like she has a normal, boring life. Now, for more general discussion on the technical aspects, I like the soundtrack. I still listen to the theme song as well as Laura Lee's theme like all the time. The episode editing was the quality of the editing and the way that scenes were composed varied quite significantly between episodes. I don't know how television production works, but it definitely felt like different episodes were directed by different people and not in a good way. Some shows make it feel good that different episodes were directed by different people, but with this show, you definitely get a sense that there are some members of the leadership for the construction of an episode that are just simply better than others. And I'd like to see the ones that are better just have more control on those weaker episodes there. There's an episode where Misty was searching through Natalie's stuff was edited a bit jarringly. There's also a transition with Misty while she was walking on the street when she was drunk. That was so weird. It was literally like a PowerPoint transition. I think they thought they were cooking with that, but they weren't. The costume design is great as always. They look very drippy in the wilderness. I'm always looking at their outfits like, dang, how did they build that? They should go into fashion when they get rescued instead of whatever they did in reality. And yeah, the last episode was excellent. The last 3 episodes actually were very excellent. Each one of them left me more excited than the last. And the final episode with the scene of Shauna uncovering that they were plotting against her into Natalie calling for help on the mountain literally made me jump up out of my seat. I'm not the kind of person who reacts very strongly to what I'm watching physically. I tend to instead just pause a movie or pause a TV show and just think if it's affecting me that much. I don't usually react physically, but for this, I jumped up. I was literally like cheering for Natalie, and against and in favor of the fact that they tricked Shauna and got away with it. So before we head out, let's talk a little bit about social media and Paramount, and kind of the way that the show is going. I think YellowJackets is still shaping up for a very solid ending, but they do need to figure out a way to get these seasons out quicker. 1 season a year is very ideal. 1 every other year is passable, but we just gotta stop with this multi-year wait in between seasons for just 10 episodes. It shouldn't be taking that long. It's not specific to YellowJackets. It's an industry-wide thing at the moment. There's very excellent acting chemistry between pretty much everyone in the cast. They all work together very, very well. Thaisa and Van genuinely do seem like a chill couple. Everyone, like the way that Lottie is, the way that Shauna is, the way that Misty is, everyone works well and blends really into the role that they play within the dynamics of the YellowJackets team. In terms of social media, this show is a social media phenomenon. I mentioned Severance for a reason at the beginning. It's always upsetting when a show like, for instance, Mr. Robot misses out on being a social media phenomenon due to timing. But shows like Succession, Severance, and now YellowJackets have really tapped into that whole fandom culture that we see dispersed across various social media platforms. You have the shipping and fan fiction portion of things. You have the theory crafting portion of things going on in places like Reddit. You have the general gossip and discussion and live reactions to episodes going on Twitter, memes and jokes and all that sort going on social medias like Twitter. And you also have people like me making videos about the show on YouTube in longer form. All of that are things. So if you're like someone who works in the industry, I think all of those things are very, very important for a show to have legs and be able to weather the very long production times that we're seeing up until this point. Shows like Stranger Things have completely lost their social media legs, even though they had a fandom behind them, simply because of the long production times. But having that fandom there definitely helps if you are going to have it. I'm a firm believer that the entire fandom, shipping and standing and gossiping culture is actually very, very powerful for keeping a show popular and in the cultural conversation, which is what everyone is after, attention on social media. Attention sells, and YellowJackets is definitely selling. I heard that this season 3 had the most viewership of all. I'm used to the shows I'm watching getting less viewership as time goes on, but this one is actually increasing, which is very, very good. The actresses involved, especially the younger actresses, are very active on social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram. They interact with one another. They interact with the show itself. They talk about it. They hang out with one another. It creates that sort of K-pop effect. You know, K-pop was very popular briefly because K-pop had this sort of well-oiled machine system where they would have each K-pop member be a sort of character of sorts. They fulfilled a specific stereotype or role within the group. This role would manifest itself in the music in terms of the way that the K-pop artist would sing or dance, or the kinds of ways they would contribute to the song, whether they be rapping or dancing or singing. And then you would also have this leg of the K-pop industry dedicated to fostering these parasocial relationships between fans and the group itself. So you would have these K-pop artists being scheduled to go on social media lives. They would be scheduled to do fan meetups. They would be scheduled to do certain types of game shows and interviews, giving fuel essentially for the fandom aspects of the community that would persist during the downtime between album releases, during long world tours where there wasn't as much content and such coming out, that would keep the fandom up, alive, and energized. While I don't think that is necessarily a good thing to be fostering these types of parasocial relationships, it is a very powerful thing in terms of keeping people talking about a property and keeping a television show on social media, having more eyes on it, more people getting interested in watching the show, and so on and so forth. So there's a line to be had, a balance to be found between playing into, not really playing into, but fostering that sort of fandom, shipping, gossipy section of a television show's fan base, and pushing it too far and becoming a CW show at worst, right? So, in short, I think the show has very good social media legs. It's going to be a cultural phenomenon for a while. People won't forget about this show for a while. I think it's going to have a good ending. Overall, I highly recommend that you watch YellowJackets. I did some complaining here, but I hope I expressed the fact that overall, I very, very much like this show. I'm not the kind of person who's good at rating things out of like 10 or out of 5. So I just give it a recommend. If you're looking for a show to watch that can get pretty dark, but is also pretty funny at times, YellowJackets is the show for you. And last but not least, before we head out, my channel is a channel where I take a look at politics, but I specifically kind of focus on online phenomenon, as I feel there's not enough people doing that from a liberal perspective, and not a right-wing or a leftist perspective, but a staunchly democratic liberal perspective. I take a look at the culture war, the anti-woke crowd, Gamergate, how they have poisoned the well concerning a lot of movies and a lot of video games coming out today. Specifically, we focused on The Last of Us, and the entire Gamergate situation that sprouted during the sequel's release, and which is continuing and actually transferring to other groups with the television shows season 2. With YellowJackets, there is a growing trend on Twitter of what I believe to be very performative moralizing of things that are happening in the story, particularly for this season with Mari and the way that she died. But more importantly, Paramount, the company which distributes YellowJackets on their streaming platform, Paramount Plus, has recently suffered the resignation of the executive behind the show 60 Minutes. You guys have probably heard of it. It's a very popular, classic show that runs stories in 60 minutes. Apparently, Paramount was forcing the executive, from what I remember, something happened as to where the executive regarding 60 Minutes felt as though Paramount was not going to allow them to run the stories they wanted to run, because Paramount wanted to remain in the good graces of the current presidential Trump administration. And so he resigned, like just completely left. That is not a good sign in my perspective, when someone who's been with 60 Minutes, managing that whole thing for so long, dedicated to journalism, bails. It's not a good sign for the sense of creative freedom in that company. And since YellowJackets is under the umbrella of Paramount, I think it's important to note that in this period where they are renegotiating contracts for the final seasons of the show, figuring out how they're going to go with the story, it might be a time where Paramount might be inserting some rules and guidelines as to what the show can do, what it can say, what they should avoid. I really hope that is not the case. I don't think it is the case. I think YellowJackets is outside of the purview and line of fire of that situation going on at Paramount with 60 Minutes and their journalistic and investigative journalism practices. However, it is important to note that we do live in an administration here in America that is pushing and testing a lot of previously agreed upon standards. So if you love YellowJackets, definitely put out your support for the current writers and the way that they are developing things. Try to make it clear that you're not going to be happy if there is overreach by executives outside of the creative industry telling the creatives what they can and cannot make. So I don't think anything's going to happen with YellowJackets concerning that, but since we do focus on this channel with the very interesting ways in which politics seeps into these unexpected places, such as the gaming community with Gamergate, and the foreign actors and domestic actors involved in that, as well as something as simple as storylines in television shows potentially being affected by the leadership of the current administration with Paramount. So if you liked this video, go ahead and leave a comment. If you found my interpretation of this three-headed triad government structure thing cool and nice to hear about, definitely leave a comment about that. Leave a like if you like, and subscribe if you want to. All right, see you guys next time.